So you just heard the latest on where the virus is now. It's worth taking a moment to think about where it began. Wuhan in central China was the first place in the world to suffer an outbreak of the novel coronavirus. It's worth saying that out loud from time to time, both because it is true and materially significant, but also because a lot of the people in charge would rather you forgot it. Because Wuhan is the site of the longest-running coronavirus outbreaks, we ought to study what happened there carefully. It's worth knowing as much as we can about how and why the disease started and how it moved so quickly to the rest of the world. Even now, we know surprisingly little of that for certain, though day by day we're learning more. For example, how easily does the coronavirus spread through populations? Well, early data from Wuhan led researchers to conclude that every infected person, on average, infected about 2.5 additional people. In epidemiological terms, that is a lot of people. It means the outbreak could double every 6 days, and that is the assumption we have been working under ever since. Now it looks like that assumption may have been a profound understatement of what's really happening. A new draft paper by a team of scholars at Los Alamos National Laboratory concludes that the Wuhan coronavirus is actually highly, highly infectious. Based on extensive case analysis, the researchers estimate that the average infected Wuhan resident infected 5.7 other people. That's enough to double the epidemic in fewer than 3 days. Is that estimate accurate? Well, we don't know if it is. An awful lot of the conclusions about this virus have turned out to be embarrassingly wrong. That's happened again and again, as we've told you, often with enormous consequences. But for a moment, imagine that this new number from Los Alamos is correct, and the size of the outbreak in Wuhan was doubling every 3 days. Among other things, that would mean that a huge number of people there were infected with the coronavirus. Here's the mystery. The Chinese government allowed 5 million residents to flee the city of Wuhan before they locked it down in January. Most of these people presumably went on to other places within China. And yet, according to the Chinese government, and by the way, as well as all available evidence we now have in the West, there were no other major outbreaks in China. Not in Shanghai, not in Chengdu, not in Beijing. Meanwhile, other cities all over Europe and the United States have been brought to their knees by the virus. How could this be? It doesn't seem to make any sense at all. For some reason, almost nobody in the American media has even asked about it. That's strange. At this point, we have no real explanation for why the coronavirus spread throughout the West, but not throughout China. We should find that out. And that's far from the only thing that we don't understand about this pandemic. How about the most basic question of all? How deadly is it? We still don't know that either. In Italy, more than 10% of people with confirmed cases of it have died. In Germany, just 2% have died. It seems clear that both of these numbers probably overstate the reality of the death rate, given that most people are not tested until they're already sick. It's a very skewed sample. More comprehensive testing in one town in Germany suggests a death rate of just 0.37%. Would that number hold in every place? Or could it be that town was infected with maybe a milder form of the virus? Or is it possible that some groups of people are more vulnerable to illness than others? We know that genetics does play a major role in the way many diseases progress. Is that true with this virus? We don't know that. While we're at it, here are a few other questions that we should answer as soon as we can. Here's one. Is the virus seasonal? Will it recede in the summer, as we're all hoping, before maybe returning in the fall and winter? If infected people get immunity, how long does that immunity last? Will the virus mutate so that people who get it this year could once again get it next year? And critically, something we should be thinking about, what are the long-term effects of being infected with the Wuhan coronavirus? There's mounting evidence that an awful lot of people may have it and not know they do. They have no symptoms. But do they face long-term health consequences from being infected? And if so, what are those consequences? We can only guess. Those are just some of the things that we still don't know about this strange new virus from Wuhan, China. It would have been nice if the authorities had learned a lot more about it before they took such dramatic steps in response to it. Our leaders had 2 examples to choose from as this pandemic bore down on our country. They could have chosen the Swedish model of targeted restrictions coupled with voluntary distancing, or they could have chosen the Chinese model, total lockdowns, internal travel restrictions, punishment for those who step out of line. Our leaders chose the Chinese model. With every passing day, the response becomes more restrictive. Requests that people stay indoors have become orders that people stay indoors. People are being fined and arrested for driving alone, for playing catch in the park, for paddleboarding on the ocean. How are measures like that keeping us safe? The short answer is we have no idea that they are keeping us safe. In fact, as noted, we still don't know much of anything, but we're definitely not encouraged to ask too many questions about it. Dr. Anthony Fauci, who has become the face of the response to coronavirus, is now suggesting that America could adopt a feature of life familiar to the population of mainland China, another one, internal passports.
Can you imagine a time where Americans carry certificates of immunity?
You know, that's possible. I mean, it's one of those things that we talk about when we want to make sure that we know who the vulnerable people are and not. This is something that's being discussed. I think it might actually have some merit under certain circumstances.
It might have some merit. Your papers, please. Imagine a country where illegal immigrants can work, drive, get welfare, and vote, all without a single authentic document. Meanwhile, more than 300 million legal citizens must produce government papers to prove their right to go outside. That could be where we're heading, and with remarkable speed. For what has to be the first time in the history of this country, Easter services have been banned in many places. Authorities will allow citizens to go to the supermarket, but not to practice Christianity in public. The Chinese population would recognize that, too. In Michigan, Governor Gretchen Whitmer has ordered the few stores that are still open to fence off areas that offer furniture, paint, home improvement goods. Governor Whitmer considers these, quote, non-essential items, so she's prohibiting their sale. The governor of Vermont has issued similar orders for stores there. Other places will doubtless follow. What would the rationale be for this? Wouldn't closing off more sections of a store increase crowding in the areas that remain open? Where exactly is the science that shows this works? Well, of course, there isn't any. They feel like doing it, so they're doing it. Politicians understand in the end that the only risk for them is in restraint. Authoritarian overreach is almost never punished. When the coronavirus has finally passed from this country, our leaders want to be able to say they took it seriously. But there's nothing serious about reactions like this. These are mindless and destructive measures. Instead of arresting people for going to church, maybe they could pause for a minute, dive into the science, and answer a few of the most basic questions first.